In section 1.2, we're going to start off looking at the order of operations. This is something everyone's seen before by this level of math, but it bears a reminder, the order in which to do the various types of operations in math, because it is so vitally important. And every year I see people who know better, sometimes just forgetting it, just getting mixed up, or not even thinking about it, and therefore they get problems wrong that they would have gotten right if they had just thought about it. So let's remember that in the order of operations, the first thing is that if anything is in parentheses, it's the first thing that you do. In fact, let's call it grouping. If things are grouped together, things that are in a group, then you do that first before you do things that are outside of it. And usually parentheses is the way that we know those. The second thing that you do is exponents. If anything is raised to a power, you figure that out before you do any multiplying, dividing, or adding or subtracting. The next thing is I'm going to put M or D and an arrow. So what you do is you do multiplying or dividing. Those essentially equal. You multiply or divide, but in order as they show up, starting from left to right. That's the way that you should do it, unless they're in a parentheses. Then you would deal with them first inside the parentheses before you go outside of it. And then the last thing is adding or subtracting, again, in order of which way you go with them. That's add or going from the left to the right, add or subtract. Okay, so one way to remember this is PEMDAS, P-E-M-D-A-S. Even though these two are equal and these two are equal, it's easier to remember that. And you can make some kind of mnemonic out of it. For instance, I grew up learning the one is, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. You could do other things with it. And I heard some others, but I just tend to forget them because I mainly know this one. Well, now let's take a look at using the order of operations in this kind of a problem where we evaluate. When you see evaluate, that usually means plug in the values for the variables and then do the calculations that it shows. So let's actually look at those. So in this case, we're going to have 3 times whatever x is, -5 squared, plus parentheses 2 times whatever y is, which looks like a 4. And then plus the z, which is a -3 to the 3rd power. And then we close this parentheses. Sometimes when there's extra parentheses like that, we might use brackets. What I mean by that is, for instance, like sometimes you'll see this kind of thing because of the parentheses in it, but it's not necessary. So therefore, we're going to go back to, and I want you used to using that you can use parentheses, you just have to match them up with it. All right, so first lesson I'm going to make you aware of, watch out. Here's an error that people tend to make right at this point. They would look at this and they would say, oh, 3 times -5 is -15, and then we're going to square that. Oh, that means that they multiplied before they did the exponent. And last I saw, exponents come before multiplying. So therefore, that's an error. Don't do that. Watch out for that. It's very common. It happens a lot, and I don't want to see you make a mistake because of that. Instead, what we have is -5 times -5, which means that that becomes a positive 25 because the 2 negatives cancel out. Over here, 2 times 4 plus 2 times 4 is 8. And here we have a -3 times a -3 times a -3. These first 2 -3s is a 9 times a -3, which means we have a -27. So we have plus a -27. Now let's talk about my expectations for this. This, you never ever leave that way, and you never do this kind of thing. Never, ever, ever, ever. You could do this, but you need to change it. In other words, all of that means it's 8 minus 27, and I expect you to write that. That's what I expect you to do. When you have a plus and a minus together, it means it's plus times the minus, and that means it's always going to be the minus or negative. You can say it either way, it won't matter. Plus the parentheses of 8 minus 27. Okay, so that's where we're at now, because we did the squaring, we did this multiplying, or yeah, we did that multiplying, we did that cubing, and now I am going to move that over here in order to continue it so I have more space. 3 times 25 is 75, and 8 minus 27, so we have is plus a negative 19, which means it should be written as 75 minus 19, and that becomes a much easier thing to figure out. So the correct answer here is 56. Watch out for those errors, specifically this one. All right, and if you do a plus minus in any other way than making it minus, then that's an error. Now let's look at using a formula where really it's the same type of thing as this, except that you have to use the formula. So the volume of a sphere, remember a sphere is like, you know, circle, it's three-dimensional though, so what we've got is like a ball kind of thing. The volume of a sphere is, and is means equals in math, is 4/3 of pi multiplied by the radius raised to the third power. So what I just did is I did volume V, 4/3 of pi multiplied, and I don't need to put a dot here in between like that. I can put it, but I don't need to, so I'm actually going to get rid of it there. Multiplied by the radius r raised to the third power. And that's a formula. So we're going to use that formula, and it's going to become really just like, oh, let's get it so this box stays in the box there. Good. And we're going to use that formula just like this. Back up here, we plugged in x, y, and z into x, y, and z. Down here, we're going to plug in the radius of 6 into the radius. And the other things, we know all the numbers. So we can say that the volume is equal to 4/3 pi. Now, and then times 6. Well, pi can be written as 3.14, or you can put it in the calculator. And if you put it in the calculator, you'll get like a very precise number because it will actually go further. But let's use 3.14. Volume equals 4/3 times 3.14 times 6. I could have also written this as 4/3 times 3.14 times 6. It doesn't matter, as long as it's very clear that it's multiplying. I prefer this way just because I don't have to worry about the dots being mistaken as decimals, which I might accidentally do myself sometimes. So you would put this in the calculator as 4 divided by 3 times 3.14 times 6. Oops, I forgot something, my mistake. Let's come back up here. I forgot the cube. I forgot the cube, I forgot the cube, which means that this is not a 6 here unless I change it. 6 cubed is 216. Now I would put all that in the calculator, and that would give me approximately 904. Okay, let's talk about that answer. All right, now the volume, 4/3 of pi multiplied by the radius raised to the third power. So when we're at this point, we have 6, and now watch, I'm going to put the units, centimeters, times 6 centimeters times 6 centimeters. That means I have 6 times 6 times 6 times centimeters times centimeters times centimeters. So when I have 216 here, that's 216 times centimeters cubed. And so in my answer, I have to also put here centimeters cubed. So my final answer is that the volume is approximately 904 centimeters cubed. You remember that when you do area, length times width, you have to have a square. It would be like some number of inches times another number of inches, so you have inches squared. Or some number of meters times some number of meters is meters squared, because there's two of them. In volume, you're looking at three-dimensional. It's 3 dimensions. So therefore, you have length times width times height, or it might be depth, depending upon how you'd like to visualize it. But you have 3 different multipliers with units. So it becomes that unit 3 times. So volume is always in a cube. Make sure whenever you're answering a question about volume, that the volume answer you give is in cube. And if it's an answer in area, then it has to be squared. So these are the main things I wanted to focus on, along with other things in this section, but make sure that you are aware of these because I consider them priority things to focus on because of the little twists or errors that are in them. Thank you for listening.